Hey, it's Bree here.
And Alan, your favorite hunter and hippie duo. In this episode, we're actually a trio. We had friend and guest speaker on Jenny Bilskie-Smith, who is a certified intuitive eating coach, as well published author. You'll hear a lot more. We talk a lot about intuitive eating, the roles that it plays in life, as well as all the things that you might think come along with intuitive eating. So if you have questions about it, please reach out. You can reach out to myself or Bree, or you can reach out to Jenny directly. Her website, as well as social media information, is in the episode, as well as in the show notes.
And there's a lot that you would also be surprised of with intuitive eating. I think sometimes we have an idea of what that looks like. So you'll definitely have to listen and hear the range of what's involved there. As always.
And always
Oh,
And always a huge thank you to our supporters, our listeners, everyone tuning in. Please don't forget, like, subscribe, share as much as possible. A huge thank you to Brianna Cote Photography for doing all of our photos and marketing materials, and Allison Band, Alllyson, for our intro and outro music. And with that, enjoy the episode. And we're here. We all know how to count.
I've already had so much fun.
You've had so much fun and you haven't even gotten to the episode yet.
Right.
As you listeners might hear, that's a different voice. We are welcoming a guest today. After last week's episode, we talked a little bit, Bree and I talked a little bit about diet and eating, and we went down this path of intuitive eating, and I was like, I know an expert. And our friend Jenny Bilskie-Smith is on with us today, and she is an expert in intuitive eating and many other things. So yeah, we brought her on. Say hi, Jenny.
Hi, I'm so honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Yes, yeah. So glad to have you. How do we want to start, Bree? Do we want to start with breath, or?
why don't we hear a little bit about Jenny? Because this is my first time meeting her, and I just want to get to know her.
I love it. Let's do it. So, Jenny, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, don't leave out all the good stuff, especially that you are have just become a published author. So make sure you throw that in there. But yeah, it's Mike's yours.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I'm Jenny Bilskie-Smith, and right now I am a certified intuitive eating counselor, and so I meet with clients one-on-one all around the United States. And I'm working on a memoir. I specialize in the intersection between disordered eating, addiction, and generational trauma. So all that really happy stuff, right? But really the idea is where we find our resilience and hope and ultimately heal and restore ourselves. So we all have these paths that we go through, and we have these really beautiful tools that we can use to pull us through. And so that's my memoir, and Alan mentioned I have a mini publication. It's just a little thing, but it was an essay that I wrote.
Don't discount it. Stop discounting it. You're a badass. It's okay. Own that shit.
Okay, I'll own it. I own it. It's called Roots, Shoots, and Blooms. It's an anthology. And so I wrote an essay that was inspired by my garden and this beautiful, beautiful bug that I found in it. And I was obsessed with this bug. And I took all these pictures of it and I posted it all over social media. And then everybody's like, it's not your friend, kill it. It's gonna kill your tomatoes. And so it was a tomato hornworm. And apparently these things are terrible for tomato plants. They completely destroy them. But I didn't know that, and I could not kill this beautiful thing. And so anyway, the essay is kind of a parallel of, looking at my connection and some of my generational trauma, and that analogy of, the roots, our family roots, and the shoots, kind of our parents, and the bloom, us, where we are, and it all exists as one, and, all that fun stuff. And so ultimately, in the end, I figure out a way to have the tomato hornworms and the tomatoes. So you'll have to check it out.
Spoiler alert. They can both exist.
Yes, spoiler alert. So but the journey is the fun part. So check it out if you're interested. And so what else do I do? So I got a bachelor's degree in nutrition, exercise, and psychology way back forever ago. And the idea was that I wanted to focus on holistic health, but it felt like, a job in health was working at the gym, making these very specific training plans for people, or being a dietitian and writing, prescriptive diets for people. And something about that just didn't appeal to me. And so then I fell into social work, and I got a job when I was 21 at a group home with adolescent male sex offenders. And that's how I started my social work journey. And then eventually I landed in child welfare and got a master's degree in social work. And I specialize in trauma and the way that trauma changes the neurological networking, and it changes our experience and our perception. But I also, having that awareness, understand how we can rebuild those networks and heal them. So that is a lot of, with intuitive eating, it's not just about eating. It brings all of this stuff together. So I did child welfare for a while, and then reached, my end with that, and decided to move to my next step. And that was to build this business that I have now. It's called Wise Body, Physical and Mental Health. And so it just sort of brings it all together. And I also love yoga. So I think that we have a lot in common. So I don't know. I think that's the fun stuff, right? And I love baseball, as you guys know. Should I mention the other thing?
Yeah, please.
So it's funny, we're doing this now. Alan's in Colorado. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, and Bree's in Wyoming. But the Diamondbacks in Arizona are beating the Colorado Rockies in baseball as we speak. So it's meant to be.
It is meant to be. It is meant to be, for sure. I expect updates throughout the podcast. You talk about generational trauma. I thought this was going to be a happy episode, and I wasn't going to have to get into my shit, but I guess not. But yeah, I'm really excited because you say generational trauma when it comes to food, and I'm like, and I'm thinking about food, and I'm thinking about how my family was around food, and very much like. First off, grew up in like a Catholic, Italian, Jewish home, and it was always like everyone's like force feeding you food, right? And it's like eat, right? I remember my great grandmother yelling at like across the table. She was off the boat Italian, and she didn't speak any English, and she would just yell mangia, which is eat in Italian. And so yeah, and then the other thing, like I was always super skinny. I still am, but I was always super skinny growing up, and I lived my entire childhood with being told I eat like a bird, and I always fucking hated that. Like it always pissed me off. So like when people like comment about like the way I eat, it like that's like one of the things. And I'm of course like a really picky eater. Until like I hear like, oh, like you barely touched that or whatever, like I didn't like the food, or and you've been out to eat with me plenty of times, Jenny, like I'm pretty sure they fuck up my food every time we go out to eat. And, right, like for me it's like there's definitely some trauma behind there. So is that what you're talking about when you talk about generational trauma, or and especially specifically when it comes to intuitive eating, because there's a whole bunch of other trauma that we don't need to talk about today, but
yeah. So what I talk about is a little more global. So just the way that kids sort of absorb their parents' neurological regulation. But as it relates to food, those food stories that we pass on and our experiences with food are so relevant to this. And as kids, that idea of autonomy is really, really important. It's the developmental stage where we're trying to establish our own autonomy, and food is one of the most powerful ways to do that. And so many times that's taken away from us. And so, by people, so we're born intuitive eaters, but sometimes that can get overridden. And so, when people are saying eat, or why are you eating that way? Why are you eating this way? It starts to teach us to override our own intuition and not trust it. And also, though, while we're doing that, there's this rebel that rises up inside of us, and it says, like, fuck that, I don't like that. Don't don't suppress my little guide here. And so so it gets confusing, and then and it's none of your business how I eat, right? It's nobody's business how you eat. You eat in a way that feels good to you. And I actually did struggle with disordered eating, and I was so like quote unquote health conscious, and I'll explain to you why I'm putting health in quotes as we work through this. But I was always so health conscious, and people always commented on my food, and they, I was so disciplined, and look at what she's eating, and it was meant to be a compliment, but it made me feel really self-conscious. And so I understand what you're saying with that. I wonder if we might now, do you want me to just sort of explain, just kind of in a nutshell, what intuitive eating is, just so for people that don't understand?
For sure, that would be great. But I do want to add something, right? So you mentioned, right, like you struggled with disordered eating. I'm just going to go out on a limb, right? We have two women on this call. I think it's a safe assumption, because I've even talked with other friends about this. Women particularly have a higher rate of this, probably. I don't know if you could speak to specific facts, but right, like I think it's a safe assumption that most women have some sort of experience with disordered eating. Is that fair, like a fair statement?
I don't, but
you don't?
No.
Okay.
But I'm not saying most women don't, like
right.
Most isn't all, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it is true that in our society, many times, well, there's a societal message, and so there are ways to override that societal message by, having healthy role models. And so, Bree, maybe I'd love to hear a little bit about that. But it is true that in our society, women are oftentimes taught to value themselves based on external qualities, the way that they look, the way that their body is shaped. And men learn also to value women for their external qualities. And it's not the type of thing where a man should be blamed for that. It's the water that we're all raised in. We're all sort of given this narrative through, popular culture and media. And a lot of times, parents who are just, I've never met a parent who didn't want to do the best that they could for their kids. Yeah. So they don't mean any harm. But a lot of times these messages come through parents. And I know for me, I was raised my dad was a competitive bike racer, and I was raised in a really, really health conscious family. So we didn't eat any sugar. We never had cereal. We never had soda. And it was almost like it was like a religion. It was this anchoring set of beliefs for us. And what I learned, I remember when I was like 5 years old, I went to the bank with my mom, and back then the bankers used to give you a sucker. And so, I was like watching the banker to see, is she going to put it in there? Is she going to give me the sucker? And I was so excited, and she plopped it in there. And then I was holding this sucker in my hand, and before I opened it, I had another idea. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to throw this away. And so when I got home, I went and I threw it in the trash. And I could not wait till Dad got home so I could tell my dad, look at all by myself at all this discipline I had to throw the thing, this sucker away. And it was, for me, this doesn't happen for everyone, but for me, the message that I adopted is that this is how I make mom and dad happy. And I was an oldest child too, and but this is how I make mom and dad happy. I make good decisions around food, and but then I'd go to my cousin's house, and they had things like Doritos and like normal foods, and at a really young age, I would binge on the Doritos, or I would, just get so obsessed with them. And I didn't understand, I thought, what is wrong with me? Like, why don't I have, discipline or willpower? I'm bad because I'm supposed to be making decisions around sugar. And so it gets confusing. So sometimes at a young age, when there's such a pervasive message of like quote unquote health, or you must eat your vegetables, kids are so concrete and they conflate, what they're doing with their value and their worth. So like if I eat good things, I'm a good girl. They conflate morality with food choices because that's the way that the kid brain works. And so all of this was going on, for me as a kid. And I remember, like, for Halloween, one more story I'll tell you about that is we'd dress up just like normal kids. We'd go trick-or-treating, and we would, get all the candy. And then we came home. And, I mean, my dad handled this so well. He gave us a choice, and he said, you can choose 5 of your favorite candies, and I'll pay you for the rest, or you can keep them all. It's up to you. And so it's like he's teaching this lesson and he's giving us this option. But, in my mind, it's like, I know what I'm supposed to do to make mom and dad proud. And that's, so it's not about what does Jenny really want. It's what does Jenny do to make mom and dad proud? And so it starts to override some of that. Now, I'm not saying this happens for every kid. I'm just sharing, my own personal experience. And then there was other stuff playing in the background. So like my mom was always on a diet. And my mom, she'd do the same thing. She'd like eat salads and then, lose control and eat a whole bunch of brownies and really blame herself. And, I'm just this young kid, watching all that. And so you don't even know it at the time, but you're just kind of picking up these messages and trying to make sense of them. And the way that my brain made sense of them is, this food is good. If I'm this way, I'm good. This food is bad. If I'm this way, I'm bad, so. For
sure. And so I want to just touch on something real quick. And we do this anytime we're talking about anything that can be deemed controversial or, important, is that, right, if you're dealing with something like disordered eating, please seek help, right? Go see your doctor, seek help the way that, you should. Know that, Jenny, you said this, and I really appreciate that you said this, that, right, like, we're all talking from our own experiences, right? And that's always important. That's always the message that we want to give. So whether you agree or disagree with anything I say, Bree says, or Jenny says, that's great. Just know that we're coming from a place of our experiences, and yeah.
And it's also not medical advice.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. And then with that said, I love that you shared those stories. You mentioned a few things, and I'll get back to those, but go ahead and tell us a little bit about intuitive eating and what it is.
Okay, so yeah, what is it really? So I kind of touched on this. So I'm going to tell you kind of the happy definition, and then I'll tell you the sciencey definition. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
So our bodies have an intuitive wisdom. And like I mentioned, we're born eating intuitively. So as far as the intuitive wisdom, just think about how, like our bodies, they know when to have an immune response. Sure, we can do things to make it so it's less likely they'll have to have an immune response, like wash our hands, but our bodies know when it's time to have an immune response. That's part of their wisdom. And our bodies know to breathe, and our hearts beat. And in that same way, that primal need for food and hunger, our bodies also know how to regulate that. And our bodies know how to regulate our size. Our bodies have a size where they like to exist, and everybody's is a little bit different. It's genetically predetermined. And so sometimes, though, what happens is that with food and body, we get these messages that there's something wrong with the way that we're eating. We need to be more healthy. We need to, or our body needs to look different. And we get this idea that it's our responsibility to change that. And so we start to rely on all of these external messages. And in doing so, we lose that connection with our internal cues. And that can happen at a really young age. But the really beautiful thing is that if we can reconnect with that internal wisdom, or stay connected to it, then we have this treasure trove of information from moment to moment about what we need to keep ourselves well, physically and mentally. So like I said, intuitive eating, it starts with this really primal aspect of intuition, which is feeding ourselves. But it bridges into emotional, psychological, even spiritual. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the happy, definition. It's recognizing that we have.
Does that include, like, it not only includes what to eat, but does it include how much to eat, or?
Yeah. So. Yes, we have an intuitive wisdom about when we're full and when we're satisfied. These are all really important aspects of intuitive eating, and so it's different also from day to day. So it's like, that's why when we have this external prescription for food, it's hard to regulate what we need intuitively, because every day it's different, And some days it's like, it's obvious why you're starving, because, you went on this, huge hike. And other days you're just really hungry and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but there's just different reasons why our body's different every day. And so to tune into that was, so hunger, fullness, and satisfaction, those are, some of the primary cues. And then there's cues around movement too, like the kinds of movement that our bodies need. And that kind of comes later in the process. So does that answer your question, Alan? Mm-hmm. Okay. So then I'll share the sciencey definition. So intuitive eating is an evidence-based practice. And that means that it has a large body of research that supports its efficacy. And so when I say efficacy, like, what is it effective at doing? And so the research shows that it's effective at improving all kinds of indicators of physical and mental health. So things like, cholesterol, blood sugar, stuff like that. And this isn't medical advice. It's not like a fix-all. But it has a large body of research that supports improvement in psychological and physical indicators of health. And it's also weight neutral. So what that means is that this idea of weight has to be put on the back burner in order to hear the body's cues. So with my clients, I always say, I don't know what's going to happen with your body. It's not a weight loss program. And it might be that you get bigger. It might be that you stay the same. It might be that you get smaller. I don't know what's going to happen. And for me, personally, when I went through it for myself, my body got bigger because I was a big time restrictor. And my clients have different responses to it. The idea is that you can be healthy despite weight. Now, this is controversial, so I want you to push back.
I'm ready to push back. I also want to make sure Bree, if she has anything that she wants to talk about, but I want to push back on that. Like weight, I agree, right? Like, I like what you're saying. I'm hearing what you're saying, and right in the fact that I think it's relative, right? You got bigger, right, on your journey through this, but you've never been, right, like big is relative, right? I'm pretty sure I knew you before you did the intuitive eating journey, right? Like, and now I know you right now. Now I know you now. When you say bigger, I'm like I chuckle a little bit, like that's funny that you're bigger. Yeah, sure, you're bigger, but again, you're still healthy. But when it comes to obesity, right, like when it and Brie and I have talked about this a bit, right, like there's an obesity epidemic in the United States, right? It is shown that obesity, right, like has major issues with, fat around organs, fat around the heart, right? It affects your joints, right? It affects your overall health. So what you're saying, right? Because like when I hear intuitive eating, right, and like you didn't describe any of what I hear, but when I hear intuitive eating, like I'm like, yeah, Oreos and Coca-Cola. Like I think of like all the things that I just love and that I know I can't eat on the regular. And it's just like, no, intuitively, I just want to eat Oreos and all the garbage and shit.
But I don't know if she's saying that's necessary. Like there's different elements, right? And she works with, I think you mentioned addiction, right? So what chemically happens in the brain, the hormones that coincide, right, with certain foods aren't necessarily, they might be masking you from your intuition. I'm guessing, but obviously, I'm going to defer to you, Jenny, to speak on that idea of, like the obesity epidemic is not related to being intuitive or conscious about eating. It's probably quite the opposite. And when you say there's like healthy weights, right, like that healthy isn't related to weight, I think it's yeah, she's not necessarily saying like I'm going to guess that most intuitive eaters wouldn't necessarily, if they're obese, become more obese. I don't know, like more obese, they'd start to get more in tune what their body is wanting and needing versus what like the dopamine hits are telling them.
Okay, you guys opened lots of can of worms. So yes, so we're gonna go there. So and I hope you guys are all right with that. So and I'm really glad that you brought it up, and I welcome these types of questions. So first, Alan, you hit on something. So there is a thing called size privilege. And that is, so like a person that has size privilege, they can go to the doctor and get treatment and not be told to lose weight. Now, or they can be, they can show up in the world and not be stigmatized. So I do have size privilege. It's not something that I should, be ashamed of. It's just that every single body should have that same privilege. They should be able to show up in the world without stigma. They should get dignity and respect, and despite their size. So that's the size privilege piece. And so what is that like to exist in a bigger body? I don't know. I can still go to the store and get sizes that fit me. And so there's this discrepancy. So when I'm working with people in bigger bodies, I want to recognize that. I don't know what it's like to walk through the world in a bigger body. And you might have to explain some of that stuff to me sometimes, but I want to know. And I'm sensitive to that. And so so you hit on one of the principles, Alan, of making peace with food and Oreos. So I want to touch on that. But first, let's talk about the obesity epidemic. So in the body positive, body neutral community, the word obesity is spelled like a swear word. Like you do like asterisks and dollar signs, because it's a metric that is based on BMI. And BMI is something that doesn't tell you anything about your health. So like a really healthy gymnast would have a high BMI. because they're short, but they weigh more because of their, so it's not, and the BMI metric was never intended to measure health and weight in the first place. It was like the statistician, early on, he was doing something else and somehow they sort of adopted it. So, and then the obesity epidemic, it's so interesting because there was this huge rise in obesity, like overnight, all of a sudden, like there was this huge obesity epidemic. And this was back in probably the late 90s. And what happened is that the scale for obesity, they bumped it so that like a person in a normal body weight, they moved it up a couple percentage points or a couple metrics, so that now a person, just like a couple. So it bumped all these people over the line into obesity, and they called it the obesity epidemic. Now, everything I'm sharing with you, I have the stuff to back it up. And so whatever we want to link in the show notes, I'm happy to do that, because I know that it's not a commonly accepted, it's a paradigm shift for sure. It's a whole different way to look at health. So then this connection between being in a larger body and health. So there is literally, and if you find it, please show me, but there is literally no study that shows that weight causes certain health conditions. Now, it is correlated, absolutely. But the thing with the research is that it doesn't account for other things that are known to impact health, like yo-yo dieting and the stigma of living in a larger body and sometimes socioeconomic status. So these are three things that independently have been shown to impact health. So like heart disease, diabetes, these common things that we associate with being in a larger body. The research doesn't connect them, and it doesn't control for those things. So there's this thing called the obesity paradox, and what it shows is actually that people in larger bodies who have, let's say, there's a list of these different diseases, but we'll just, kidney disease is one of them. So that's one that's coming to my brain. So people in larger bodies who have kidney disease fare better than people in smaller bodies who have kidney disease. And, people in larger bodies who have diabetes fare better than people in smaller bodies who have diabetes.
What do you mean by fare better? What's fare better?
Okay. So they're more likely to improve their health. They're more able to, like their morbidity and their mortality is not worse. Okay. Their morbidity and their mortality is better than a person in a smaller body. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Is the rate at, so that's fine and well, I can appreciate that, but is the rate at which kidney disease or diabetes greater if you're in a larger body? Like, it's great that you can deal with it better, right? I get that you're saying that, but are you less likely to have it if you are not in a larger body?
So what the research shows is that so morbidity is, are you going to die sooner? So do people in larger bodies, I'll address your question specifically, Alan. So do people in larger bodies die sooner than people in smaller bodies? And the answer is no, they do not. Do people in larger bodies have more, morbidity is the illness, mortality is the death. Yeah.
Yes.
Do people in larger bodies have more morbidity than people in smaller bodies? And when you control for those things that I outlined, like the impact of being in a stigmatized body, that can be any stigmatized body, the impact of yo-yo dieting, and socioeconomic factors, they do not have those diseases more often than people in smaller bodies. So I'll give you, this might help you get your mind around it a little bit. Okay, so diabetes, right? So diabetes is type 2 diabetes. It's about your body being not so sensitive to insulin and sometimes not having enough insulin, right? And so what happens is that your blood sugar gets wacky. And so what some of the research has shown is that that is connected. It's also connected to an elevated fight or flight response, which is a result of trauma or high stress. And it makes sense because whenever you're in a chronic state of fight or flight or high stress, then your body mobilizes sugar and it moves it into your bloodstream. Now, and so of course that causes an increase in blood sugar. And so one of my clients, she had diabetes when she came to me, and her body didn't change a ton. She had had gastric bypass. She'd always been in a bigger body. But when she was able to improve her relationship with food, which means, like the binging goes away, the Oreos end up being neutral. They're kind of not really a thing. Mm-hmm. Then her blood sugar, she was like not even pre-diabetic anymore. Again, her body didn't change at all, but her relationship with food changed. So, okay, so
can you explain that? Like you're saying, like
the insulin, like with stress, right? Fight or flight, it mobilizes insulin, go like to your limbs to run, right? And then it doesn't get burned off, and so then it gets stored, and then it's that constant, and then it gets replaced, right? So you're like, it's this cycle of just building up without burning off what is being like the insulin that's being like kicked out. And so the stress, like what's the chicken or the egg, right? Like something might have caused them to move towards like overeating and developing a larger body. And then the stress of the larger body continues that cycle of stress and the chemical imbalances that happen that lead to diabetes, right? To have those massive fluctuations. And then, so what she's saying is like, she's essentially removing, right, the stress of what the relationship to eating is, which is bringing down, and I'm just saying this, trying to see if I'm like hearing it right. And maybe like a non-expert trying to regurgitate it helps.
No, thank you. Yeah, exactly. Because it's confusing. Well, you said go ahead, Bree.
No, that's...
So it mobilizes sugar. You said it mobilizes insulin, and it mobilizes sugar. So, and you said something about them becoming, the stress of becoming larger. And perhaps they were meant to be larger. Mm-hmm. Like genetic. So we have this idea that a small body is a healthy body and a larger body is not a healthy body. But weight is not a behavior. So we can do health encouraging behaviors, but weight isn't a behavior. And you can be healthy at any weight. Mm-hmm. So now, Bree, this idea of like some people are meant to be in bigger bodies, it's genetically predetermined. So our height is predetermined. It's 80% predetermined by genetics. And nobody would dispute that. People are like, well, yeah, of course it is. That makes sense. But weight is also genetically predetermined, 70%. But people dispute that, and they believe that if they're supposed to be in a bigger body, that can't be true. And this has been shown in adoption and twin studies that weight is genetically predetermined. Now, that doesn't take away from the pain of living in a larger body in this culture. and being stigmatized because everybody believes that people in larger bodies, they do certain things like that, they're at fault for having that body.
I guess my question would be though, like, because you stop growing height-wise at a certain age. So what is the age that you stop? Like, how do you know if you're in your meant to be body, or if you are actually like have an issue, whether that falls on, or like you're not accurate, and that can fall on either side of the spectrum, underweight, overweight, to like what your meant to be body is. And the only reason I said like move into a larger body, like the trauma work that I've done, there is a piece where people have been like, it's pretty common with sexual abuse, like young sexual abuse, where they don't want to look pretty. So they do things, whatever that looks like, to, not be attractive to people. And it's
protective.
I'm not saying that larger bodies aren't attractive, but I'm saying there is, but maybe that person, the larger body, is not their meant to be weight in this world, right? So like, how do you decipher that?
Yeah.
And maybe you don't
good
need
question.
to.
And
you do. That's a good point.
And what's within reason? Like, I'm not saying that, right? Like,
like my 600-pound life. Yeah.
Right. That's exactly my point. Like, my 600-pound life, Jenny, you can't be telling me that's healthy. Like, I can't get on board with that. Right? Like, she's not meant to be 600 pounds. And yes, there's a whole slew of things that are going into that, but that can't be healthy. But it's also, but I'm not just saying this for the larger body. I'm saying this for the anemic, bulimic, right? Like anorexic, right? Like 95-pound person, right? Like that's not healthy either, right? So like what's, and right, maybe you're 95 pounds and that's where you're supposed to be. Like, I'm not putting a number on it, but my point is that, right, like I love what Bree said, right? So like, can we get an answer to that? But also there has to be, and again, the spec, right? BMI, I agree. BMI is bullshit, right? Like, because you look at bodybuilders who are considered overweight,
it's a stupid
right?
metric.
Right. Like, but I do believe body fat percentage is a good number to look at. And again, right, it's not that everyone is supposed to be 7%, right? Like, I just think that tells you a little bit more than what, and for those that are listening that don't know, BMI is a body mass index, and it's a number based off of height ratio to weight ratio that, again, like Jenny said, it was I think it was arbitrary how they came up with it. And like it was like your weight is supposed to be this much of your height and blah, blah, blah. And so I agree that BMI is bullshit.
Yeah. And it's like bones.
Right.
Like someone with big bone and thin bone can be like an incredible difference in like there's
so I'm not arguing that. And so I would love to hear like your response to what Bree's saying, as well as there's got to be some reason, like 600-pound life, that's a problem.
Yeah. So what the heck is my set point, and how do I know if I'm there? Number one. And number two, what about the psychological factors? So there's situations where people use their body to protect. So maybe they are in a bigger body because psychologically and neurologically they're doing that to protect. And also people try to get into smaller bodies to disappear and not be seen and stay, like, not develop sexually,
or to meet,
to
meet a health standard that we've created, right? Like this ideal of what a woman or man should look like.
Yeah, and it's complicated though, because a person who is who doesn't have other vulnerabilities is probably not going to tip over into an eating disorder. So like Bree, you have a good relationship with food in your body, and you just always have. You mentioned in the beginning, or I think you always have, I don't know, you do now anyway. And so the idea is that it's not about the body. So the way that we're trying to control our body and the way we're trying to morph it is not so much about the body. It's more about the psychology and the beliefs around body. Now, does that make sense? When it comes to,
I think so.
Does that make sense, Bree? I can go a little, ask me more questions. Okay.
Wait, can you repeat it? Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So, the body is not, what we're trying to do about the body is not so much about the body. It's more about the mind. It's more about the psychology. It's the belief. Yeah. And so if we have an unhealthy relationship with food or an unhealthy relationship with our body, that all exists up here in our heads, not in our bodies. Now, certainly it has an impact on the body, but body image is in the mind. So like if you change your body, it doesn't change body image, because body image is in the mind. Mm-hmm. And body image is basically it's one aspect of how you know yourself. So, and for some people, that aspect of how they know themselves it outweighs some of the other ways that they know themselves. So like I know myself as, a writer and a thinker and a reader and a wife and, all these other roles. And I also know myself in my body. But for some people, the way that they know their bodies outweighs all that other stuff. It takes primary importance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think I've never had an eating disorder. I mean, it's what is a disorder in terms of eating? Like that's a whole what you can go into. But I have a conscious relationship to my food, but it's always and my weight, right? And so 2.5 years ago, I weighed almost 20 pounds more than I did now, which was 20 pounds more than I did probably 6.5 months before that. I was living in my car. I was eating differently. I wasn't as mobile. My lifestyle was different. I did hit a weight where I said, okay, I weigh this. Wow. I didn't realize that. I could tell my jeans were a little tighter. My jacket was a little tighter. And I was like, I need to start getting active again and like watching what I eat. But I don't see that as an eating disorder. It was just like, I've okay, my lifestyle typically, and in college I was 20 pounds more than I am now. So like my lifestyle, and I guess I never had like shame, but I've been connected, I've had awareness around it being like, ooh, like I don't go on like diets per se, but I'm like, ooh, I gotta like be a little, change the way that I'm eating and moving my body and all of these things. But I think there's the differences, like my outlets for things might have been like alcohol and drugs versus like some are like the food, right? They use that piece and I just like I guess I don't connect with the idea of a disorder, but I see it's all the psychological part, and I'm not saying I just eat whatever what's the difference between health conscious and then disordered eating?
Perfect.
Right?
And I still have to address your other question, your set point question.
Sorry, hold on one second. But also, Bree, we've talked about like your weight, like being 20 pounds over in the past, and I believe you mentioned like your performance and in the things that you do as an athlete was off too during that point, right? Like,
well, I just wasn't doing it, and then when I went back to running more, I was like, oh gosh, this is hard.
Yeah. So like performance was hindered by this gain in weight.
However, performance in college,
how do we know that?
Water
was it
polo.
just that she wasn't running, or was it her weight?
Yeah.
We don't know.
I mean, it is. I felt the difference on my joints, right? Like and I do that with backpacking. If I have a 40-pound backpack on versus, or a 50-pound backpack versus a 27-pound backpack on, I can feel it in my joints. But it's also maybe because they're not used to, they haven't built with that impact. But the 20 pounds extra in college as a water polo player, like I needed that weight, right? So like I've had, I don't know, but also we was college and we didn't really eat very healthy.
Yeah,
and we drank a lot of beer. And like, I could have performed really well. Maybe I could have performed well at water polo. And granted, my last year I lost like 10 pounds, and like
You performed well at water polo because of the beer. That's the key. Everything in college is because of the beer.
But
so.
I think it's like a very fine line of like what is conscious and connected eating and like taking action. Like I'm not a diet person, but I do things where I'm like, ooh, I'm gonna, and I am like in a deep exploration of food as of lately. Really nothing to do with weight, but everything to do with like, how is this interacting in my body? Like, what are the signs that, because I've studied some Ayurveda and it's like, how do I build that in? But it's not, I don't fall in line with everything that they believe, like they follow. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's the difference between being health conscious and so intuitive eating ultimately is about eating in a way that feels good to your body, and it's about removing the things that disrupt you from hearing your interoceptive awareness. Mm-hmm. And so when you were living in your car, I would guess that it was a more stressful time.
No.
Okay, it was a joyful time.
Yeah, I chose to live in my car.
Okay.
It was, I think a lot of that time was, I purposely took some time to like slow down, to turn inward, to like figure out where, like I left Colorado and that's how I landed in Cody, but it was really like tapping back into creativity, slow. I think a lot of it's like I wasn't getting out in nature as much as I did when I lived in a house because I was traveling around. So like my days to get out, I was in a car, and then figuring out the new town that I was in, I was eating not as healthy, or for me, what I would consider healthy, because I cooked it from a jet boil, you know, and so I just different. And then I was also, when I linked up with certain people, like I was eating kind of with their lifestyle, which was very different from like my lifestyle typically. So there was, it was a really free time, like probably less stressful than, like every day. I think about it all the time.
Go ahead, Alan.
We were told, like, you know, we were sold this whole SNL bit, right, of living in a van down by a river, right? Like it's.
I know. Did you like how I went straight to you? Must have been stressed. Yeah, no, actually,
I was really
That's
that's
exactly
it. Sorry about that.
No, but that's the thing. Like here in Colorado, and I'm sure it's everywhere, but like you see it a lot here in Colorado. Is living in a van down by the river is the fucking dream, right? Like people are in their homes trying to sell their homes and get rid of all their shit to go live in a van down by the river. So it's funny to see that, right? Like you put that like, oh, that must have been stressful, and I'm thinking like, no,
how freeing.
Like,
I can see that too. I
mean, it doesn't come without stresses, let me tell you. I mean, stress on the body. I realized like, oh gosh, all my clients who like sit at a desk all day, this is what they feel when I'm like sitting in a car all day.
In the car,
But
I would I wonder, you know, I mean, I don't know who's to say, because you know, like with health, it's about zooming out. We have to see it with a bigger lens, and it is about that finding that space to, you know, have that white space and find that creativity and find that adventure and that spontaneity and whatever it is. And it's not always about being rigid around our eating. And as far as, so it's intuitive eating is always about getting to the point where you eat in a way that feels really good to your body. And on like Instagram and, you know, all that stuff, like when people look at intuitive eating, it's like cupcakes and donuts everywhere. And that is because there's this step that you go through, which is making peace with food, where you offer yourself unconditional permission to eat all food. And the reason for that is because when that permission is not offered, it stays urgent. And there's ways to do it, so it's like I said, on Instagram, it's like you're eating donuts all day long. It's not like that. It's you reintroduce foods that are considered like forbidden, or, and you do it in a way that's safe, and, you're already nourished. So the process is called habituating. Okay. And so this is something that naturally happens when we eat normal and don't restrict. You habituate to food. But when you restrict, then there's certain foods that you just don't quite get that habituation with. So whenever people are like, I'd eat Oreos all day long. Have you guys heard anybody say that today? then sometimes, I got to pick on Alan. What that usually means is that there is a history of restriction with it. I was listening to this podcast the other day, and this guy, his thing was Oreos. And when he was growing up, sure enough, and he would eat a sleeve of Oreos. If he sat down, he couldn't stop because it remained so urgent to him, because and so he thought, well, something's wrong with me. I must be addicted to sugar. I must be addicted to Oreos. So I need to address that for you guys too. The idea of food addiction.
I don't think that I'm addicted, and right, like maybe we can address this, like, and just see like a little mini process here. But like when I sit down with a thing of Oreos, I'm not like, oh, I'm addicted, so I need to eat these, or like
it's not like you're conscious though. That's the whole thing. A lot of this is in the subconscious, right? Like. And I think that's where she was saying, like, the psychological piece of it is what you really are working on, right? Versus then, like, what it actually
thank you. Because it's not, exactly, it's not like, I never let myself have Oreos. Because maybe you're letting yourself have Oreos, but there's this little tape playing that's shaming you while you're eating the Oreos. And it might be subtle. It might be subtle, but something, you believe that Oreos are not good for your body. And so when you eat an Oreo, your tape starts playing and it goes, oops, you shouldn't be eating this. You shouldn't be eating this. This is bad for your body. And so it creates this deprivation mentality. And there's this analogy that I like to use. It's like a rubber band. So this can happen if you're physically restricting or psychologically restricting, which it sounds like that's what you're doing, Alan. So the more that you restrict, the tighter the rubber band gets. And eventually, when you let go of that rubber band, there's going to be some type of a binge. And people always go, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with me. And it's really just because of the restriction. And so there's a process to move through that, so that food is not urgent, food is not forbidden, and then it becomes really neutral. Now, I had to do this with potato chips. And I still love potato chips, but it's
I need to hear this. I love chips.
They're amazing, right? Yeah. So I used to, tell my husband, like, you cannot keep these in the house, because it was hard for me to eat one or two or eat a handful. Like I love them so much. And then when my stepdaughter was here in the summer, we always had chips in the house. And so that was a nightmare for me. And, so I had to go through this process of habituation. And now today, chips can sit in the pantry and I forget about them. They go stale. Or another one was, it's about, you also figure out, how to genuinely find satisfaction with food. So you have this idea that there's this food that's like kind of sinful and forbidden or whatever. So, there's the chips for me, and then also French fries. Now, today I still love chips, but they're not urgent to me. It's like, I enjoy them, and I enjoy them as much as I want to enjoy them, but it's not urgent. But French fries, what I learned, so those were super, I love French fries, and I would always order a salad. And then I'd wait for my husband to like finish. I'd be like staring at his French fries the whole time. And so when I went through this process with the French fries, what I discovered is that it's really hard to find a good French fry. Like I used to just eat cold, limp, gross French fries it's like I was like, I have to eat these French fries, I love them. But now it's like, no, like I'm not going to eat a French fry unless it's delicious. And there are some good French fries, but it's hard to find a good French fry. And so now it's like, if I want French fries, I'll order them, but if they're not good, I'm not going to eat them. Whereas before, my brain was like, this is bad, and so it just stayed urgent, and I'd eat it whether it tasted good or not. A lot of times people discover they have this urgent food, and when we go through this process, they realize they don't even like it. Like, it happens a lot with my clients. It's funny. Like, one of them was a chocolate thing, and Hershey Kisses, and I'm thinking like, well, Hershey Kisses, like, why not Godiva or something, but whatever. And so, but they ate Hershey Kisses, and when they really tuned in, they realized that it kind of tastes like a crayon tip. They don't really like Hershey Kisses, and if they want chocolate, they find chocolate that's good for them. So it's that morality that we're ascribing to food, and we have to zoom out, because worrying is bad, period. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's hard on our health, period. It's a human thing. It's going to happen. But it does create this physiological response that causes all this other stuff to happen. So like cortisone, mobilizing sugar into, raising your heart rate, higher blood pressure. Stress kind of does all this stuff. So stressing about your food is also not good for your health. And pleasure is good for your health. Like, pleasure is, and pleasure is not the same as gluttony or laziness. It's, so like, for example, you seek satisfaction. You seek, that pleasant moment. So like, eating more food would be unpleasant. Or sometimes eating when you're not hungry is unpleasant. So when is it really pleasant to eat? When is it really satisfying to eat? And these are kind of the things that we play with and tweak. And and it all starts with learning to cue into your hunger, and then you kind of build on it. And you got to take off the rigidity and the food is good or bad and all the rules that we have around food. And like the beliefs. So that's this process anyway.
So let me see if I can relate this just like to the layman. Like,
yeah.
So when I say like when I say like I would eat Oreos all day, like that I wouldn't, right? Mm-hmm. Because that doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so like I feel like I've gotten to this point with Coca-Cola, not cocaine. Right. Like, I'm to the point where, like what you were saying, right? Like, I don't like Coca-Cola out of a fountain, out of a bottle, out of, right? Like, I like Coca-Cola out of a can. Mm-hmm. Everything else tastes like shit. And, like, I'm not going to drink it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so, right. So, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, right, like, back to the Oreos, right? Like, I'm not going to eat Oreos all day because it doesn't make me feel good. Right. So is that more along, right? Like we have these restrictions, like, oh no, I can't eat these Oreos, but then you binge on them and you think, right, oh no, I would eat these all day. But right. So, but that's me and that's my experience, right? Because it doesn't make me feel good. But how do you explain my 600-pound life? Right. How do you, right? And maybe that's the exception, right? Maybe like we're so, right, like the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? Like we're so focused on these exceptions and not necessarily the rules, but how do you explain, right, the person that would eat the Oreos all day long? All right, how do you? Are we now getting into the psychological trauma, and then like they're using the food as a coping mechanism type of thing? Mm-hmm. Like what's going on there? Yeah.
So sometimes it is, so like we have this term emotional eating. Sometimes it is that, but most of the time when I dig in, no matter what their size, it all goes back to there is some restriction going on. And And any person that is in a larger body, they have probably dieted. They have probably tried so hard to control their bodies. And that dieting up and down, that can bump your set point weight up. That yo-yo, because whenever the prescription for weight loss is less calories in than out. But the problem is that whenever we seek intentional weight loss, we enter into this fight with our own biology. So as soon as there's fewer calories in than out, then this hormone called leptin goes up, and it increases our appetite and reduces our metabolism. So remember The Biggest Loser, that TV show?
Yep.
So all these people in larger bodies, they lose weight in front of America. And they were determined. I mean, you better bet that they're determined. And how much shame would they experience if they gained it back? Because they lost all this weight in front of America. And guess what? They all gained it back. Not because they weren't trying. Like, they even had trainers with them afterwards. But what happens is, so they had this study that looked at all of them 6 years later. And they had less lean muscle mass then, working out all the time, than before the show started. And their metabolism was down 500 calories a day, still 6 years later, 6 years after the competition. And the thing is that anytime like this intentional weight loss thing, 95 to 98% of the time, it fails. And that's not to say that you can't lose weight, because we've probably all been on diets where we lose weight. Eventually, though, within 3 to 5 years, the weight is going to come back on. It will. So you see the before and after pictures on Instagram, and then all the shame when it comes back on later, because we enter into this fight with our biology, and it jacks up our metabolism, and it bumps our set point weight up. Because the idea is you want to have a good relationship with your body, and when your body isn't getting the nutritional intake, even if you're not like totally starving yourself, it replicates trauma. And so your cells are like, oh my gosh, I'm not getting what I need. I'm not getting what I need. And that creates the same neurological response as trauma. And so, when you can kind of nourish your body the way that it's supposed to be nourished, and when your body's hungry and you eat, and when you're full, you stop, and you kind of like get into this conversation with your body, then it starts to go like, oh, okay, she's got my back now. She's listening to me now, and I'm not so scared. So I'm not going to hold on to all of this extra. And it kind of what needs to fall away falls away, if that's what is going on with the body. But so many times, like people even in larger bodies, there's so much restriction in their background and so much yo-yo dieting. And so does that make sense, how it creates this cycle?
Well, I would wonder, what's the time period that Biggest Loser, like, what was the time period that they had, like the competition was, like over how many months?
Yeah, not long? So are you getting it like?
Wasn't it like 30 days or 60 days?
I don't know.
It was something crazy and
ridiculous.
ridiculous.
You're right. So
but it's
long.
like it's not a health, like, so that, like what you're saying, the comparison of before and after is like our bodies do adapt, right? And so things adapted to their weight before the competition, and they're like shocking the system by trying to lose so much, like, activity and eating and everything all at the same time. That's like that has to be a massive trauma on the body. And then it's not happening in a sustainable way that it can adapt to the new form. So what does it do? It goes back to the old or more, right? Because it's like chaos in there. Whereas like a more sustainable, if like you're not at whatever your weight is, I don't know. If people do want to lose, like if they do want to lose weight, right? And what I'm hearing a lot too is it's like you're working with shifting from it being done for you versus like an external, right? Because like even with that, there's like the shame that went with like I was on The Biggest Loser, I lost all this weight, I gained it back, like and when it's just like to actually just feel good versus the number, like, and I don't know. Yeah. I'm just like, was hearing a lot of things, and because I was trying to relate into like myself again, when I gained some weight, and it was like, it was like, okay, well, this is where I'm at, and I think and see how people could go down like a lot of, I was like, oh, whoa, okay, I'm gonna like, I gotta start maybe just keeping an eye on what I eat, like just getting more active, whatever.
But there's this assumption that it's the weight that's making you feel bad. And it's
and it's not the weight. I knew it wasn't the weight. I wasn't feeling bad because of the weight, but I do think I was feeling bad because of what I was eating. Like not mentally bad, but like I didn't feel good. Like I felt sluggish. I felt all these things because I wasn't like active as I normally am. I was eating different foods, so it's like the foods and it's the lifestyle versus the number. I don't own a scale, okay? Like if someone has a scale at their house, I'm like, oh, I wonder how much I weigh, like, and I know that's appropriate. Like I'm not saying that to be like, oh, I don't need a scale. It's just that I don't gauge. I gauge things on how I feel.
That's it. Yeah.
So real quick, Biggest Loser, 30 weeks.
30 weeks. Oh,
yeah,
so
it's
like,
ridiculous. But still, that's not.
Yeah,
you make a good point, Bree.
It's
not. Yeah, yes. You make a good point. It's not sustainable. So I'm not using that as an example of sustainability. But you're.
I think it proves your point. I mean, I think it suggests what you're talking about is that like, if weight loss is something that you want to seek out, this crash diet, it's not creating a lifestyle. It's creating trauma. It's creating more psychological impact than if you were to just start to shift your, like this approach that what I'm hearing that you have with intuitive eating, like that approach is more like innate and natural. And so it's not this like boom, like hit across the side of
it's the problem. I see a few things that come up in my thoughts. One, we're all about instant gratification, right? So right, and again it goes back to the images that we're supposed to be this, right? And oh well, I need instant gratification, so like 30 weeks, like that might sound like a while, but like we all agree that that's not. But also like I immediately think because I still think there's a level of obesity that's bad. We haven't gotten to that yet, but how my question is, how long did it take you to get there? Let's just keep using the 600-pound life, right? How long did it take? You didn't get there in 30 weeks, so you can't get back in 30 weeks. Right, the journey, the journey, it took way longer than 30 weeks. It took umpteen years to get there, right? So, I feel like food choice is a lifestyle in my mind, and maybe this goes against intuitive eating, right? And again, I go back to what makes me feel good, right? When I overeat, right, like I feel like I'm pretty intuitive eater, right, for the most part, because like if I'm eating to gorge myself, like it happens, right, where I'm like so full and like I hurt, like I don't enjoy that after.
Yeah.
But the point is that like it's a journey. So if it took you 10 years to gain 150 pounds, right, because of binge eating, right, it's gonna take 10 years, right? And maybe not 10 years, but like there's a similar journey to get back to the set point weight that we're talking about.
Or what if it's this, so it's all about what's disrupting them from hearing the cues of their body. What is disrupting them? And so many times what's disrupting them is the pain of living in a larger body and the stigma of that. So what if, rather than us having this belief that they need to change their body, we support their psychological healing, and the the terrible experience of living in a world who has stigmatized them all their life, from being in this bigger body. And people that are in bigger body, so usually the people that are on my 600-pound life, they've always been in a bigger body, or there was this tipping point where, their body matured, and then it was, they just, and so anybody that stigma is like what I think really needs to be worked on. Like, instead of us believing you are doing something wrong, you need to change the way you're eating, it's more, what are we all doing wrong that create this stigma? What is the system saying to people in these bodies, and how is this system judging them and making it harder for them to seek health? And then they adopt this internalized stigma also, and in their mind, their body isn't good, so it's harder for them to be an intuitive eater and trust their body. Like, if you have a smaller body, society says small bodies are good, so when you hear a message from your body, you go, well, my body's good, so, this message must be good. But when you're in a bigger body and you hear a message from your body, you think that your body's bad. And so it's harder to connect with the cues of the body. It's easier to kind of discredit them and override them. And Alan, what happens is sometimes, like, when you have gone so long without hearing the cues of the body and overriding them or dieting and restricting, is that they go, he's not listening to me anyway, I'm going to stop sending these cues. And the cues get muted. You can't hear them. And so part of the process of becoming an intuitive eater for a lot of people is to make it safe for those cues to come back on board so that the people can actually hear them. Because they can't always, I know, I don't like to eat beyond comfortable fullness. That doesn't feel good to me. But right. There are a lot of people who do eat beyond comfortable fullness, and they're not so much cued into, like, how am I feeling right now?
That's the intuitive part that they're missing.
Yes, it's disrupted.
So, I want to talk about something, and again, my experience, right? Because, like, we're talking about, like, larger bodies and smaller bodies and all that, right? So all of that is dependent, because I'm the opposite, right? So I grew up skinny, being told I don't eat enough, being told I eat like a bird, and all my life I've been trying to gain weight.
Right.
Even to this day, I'm still trying to, like, I'm paying someone right now to help me gain weight, right? Like, so that, like, it's both.
What do you
right?
want to gain weight for?
Right.
Because there's absolutely trauma there. So part of it is I want to gain weight because, right, like, being a man and being small isn't good.
Well, I know. I mean, I just was like, I'm just more of like, what are you? I'm not saying that should or shouldn't, but, like, I was wondering why you, like, your
I have a
weight
few
is a
reasons.
thing. Is it how your body looks? Is it? What?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. So it's a few things, right? Like, it's absolutely the image that society, right, like, paints, right? Like, so, and a lot of this is, right, trauma, right? So, right, it's this image that society has of, like, what men should be muscle bound, and, right, like, so there's definitely that going on in my mind, and I fought with that all my life, right? But now that I am the age that I'm at and I've done a lot of the work, right, I still fight with that, right? That absolutely is still there, right? Yeah. That has not gone away, but I've gotten better at dealing with it. And now it's, right, like, like, now I'm like, fuck, I want to gain the weight just because I want to see what I look like at that weight, right? Like, and like, I want to lift heavier weights, and so, like, I'm sort of at, right, like, I still battle that trauma in the background, but it's also more so, like, curiosity, like, and, right, like, I've even said, like, oh, I'd love to get to 200 just to see, like, I don't care if I stay there, I would just love to get there to see what it looks like, see how I perform, see how I feel, see how I do out hunting, see how I do out hiking, right? And for me, it's like, oh, just see what it's like. And, I think I'm supposed to be at, like, 170. I think I'm supposed to be at, like, 170, 175. Right? I do think, I agree. I think there is a set point. And I think that's mine, because, like, I feel like I've been, like, 185, and I feel like, but I was also eating atrociously, like just fat galore. I was super chunky, and like my performance was terrible. Right. So to your point, like where I was still exercising and still doing everything and my performance was shit. And I was like, so there was a direct correlation for me to my weight, but it was
you said you were eating crappy too.
To like to the percentage of my body fat was the highest it ever was. So like, so for me, it was a percentage of body fat. Like I was eating, like I was throwing pieces of cake in protein shakes. Like it was right where now I'm eating very clean, like very clean in the sense of, right, like if I want Oreos, I'll have Oreos, right? Like I don't see, and that's what's interesting, right? Because we talk about the restriction, and I'm sure there's something going on there psychologically for me, but if I want Oreos, I'm going to have them.
Mm-hmm.
But I also
but you
absolutely
still think they're
think
bad
like,
for you.
Yes, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
100%. Especially at the rate that I eat them, right? When I eat them, right? Like, because I will eat a sleeve. Like, and that's the thing is, like, I know if I'm going to sit down and eat Oreos, I'm going to eat a sleeve. And so then I'm just like, I'm just not going to do that, right?
Right.
But so there's this aspect of, right, like, oh, bigger body. And there's probably more bigger bodies, larger bodies that have to deal with, right, the shame of that. But also there's this aspect of being smaller. And a lot of people don't know what that's like, right? Because especially as a man, I think that, right, like men get a lot of shit on in a lot of social situations because they're men and they shouldn't cry and they shouldn't do this and they shouldn't do that. But that's a different story. But I think that, right, like being small is bad too. And it's funny, like I've even had friends say to me like, oh, like it was funny. We were actually celebrating my friend's birthday the other day, and she said to me, this was the other day, and she was like 2 weeks ago, she was like, oh, she's like, have you lost weight? And like that like triggered something, and I was like, what? Like, no, I didn't lose weight.
Yeah, it's like the commenting on the body, it implies something, even if it's meant to be a compliment.
But also like there's also to me like a point like where we can't be so, right, like hesitant to, like, if you like to compliment on the body. I get where like that's going, right? But like if you're working out,
did you lose weight, or they just were asking a question,
right? And that's the thing is my friend was just asking a question, and I'm the one who turned it into something, right? But then like it goes into the trauma, right? Like of, right, like fuck, now I lost weight. Oh, they think I'm losing weight. I gotta go get muscles, right? And like, and that's again because I've done the work. Like, I noticed how I felt immediately. I was like, oh, that's silly.
Can I say one quick thing just to like plug in before we go too far off? Because you said like mainly it happened. I don't know what you said specifically, but with like the underweight and males, but that judgment does happen a lot in females. Like I know many females who just like can't gain weight and they get judged. Oh, they must have an eating disorder or this, that, and the other. There's a lot of judgment also. I just wanted to like plug that in before we.
Right. And that's my point in saying this is that like it's so much like, oh, it's all about the obese person losing weight. No, it's all spectrums.
It's any means of trying to control your body. Yeah. And not kind of just letting your body do what it does. It knows how to control your weight. It knows how to, when you're cued in. Yeah. You're like my hairdresser. So, and thank you for the vulnerability, Alan, honestly, because it's a great example and it does need to be said. And, there is that for men big time. And that's what leads to all kinds of, performance enhancing stuff at the gym. I mean, all of that. So it is absolutely there for men and in a little bit of a different way, straight men anyway. And so, but to your point, Brie, my hairdresser, she's like so skinny and she wanted to gain weight and she married a bodybuilder and he was, she was eating so much every day, good stuff, but like healthy stuff, and she wasn't doing much cardio because she's trying to gain weight and she was, lifting weights and she just felt like crap all the time. And she did gain a little bit of weight, but she was just always felt so full. My point is her set point is small. It is what it is. So yeah, it's like, even when a person eats, people think that a person who's in a larger body, they are that way entirely because they're eating too much and not moving enough. A person in a smaller body can eat an insane amount of food. And because their set point says, oh, no, you don't, they're going to stay right around that range. And so it is the same. You're right. It's not about bigger or smaller. It's about what is behind our desire to manipulate our bodies. And what I always say to my clients, when we're starting to work together, is of course they want to, if they're in a bigger body, of course they want to lose weight. I mean, that is what society tells them will make them feel better. And so I always ask them, what will having a smaller body get you? And they say things like confidence. And the truth is, there is some power in having a smaller body. There is privilege in having a smaller body. Perhaps, and they say health, but I say, what if you can be healthy and have confidence and have all of that stuff and your body doesn't change at all? Do you still want to do it? And because a lot of times that's what happens. So a lot of the people that I work with, like I said, sometimes their body changes, sometimes it doesn't, but their health and their psychological health changes. So they feel better. They do feel more energetic. So like Bree, when you changed the way you were eating, you changed the way you were moving, consequently, you did drop some weight. That's the way that happened for you. Perhaps if you hadn't dropped the weight, but you were moving a lot and you were eating in a way that felt really good with your body, perhaps you still feel better, And so I'm just making the point that we can't conflate I feel better with health. And the joint thing, that's so common. And guess what? I have always had a small body and I have major joint issues. Like I just had my hip replaced and I'm only almost 45. Like we forget, like people in smaller bodies have heart disease big time. People in smaller bodies have blood pressure big time, heart disease, all that stuff. And so we can't be so quick to say like, being in a larger body causes this. We have to look at it more globally. Does that make sense?
We've got off on a few tangents. Right, and I believe you now answered Bree's question. Yeah, Bree?
Yeah, I don't even remember.
Okay.
Set point and let's see. There's set point and
so what about like the within reason, like the too skinny, too fat, right? Like what is that?
It's none of my business. How do they feel? It's none of my business what they do with their body. If they want to feel better, I can help them feel better, but that's none of my business.
So you're saying that, right? If they feel like crap, you're saying it's more of what they're eating than what their body type is. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It would depend. So some of my clients, they feel like crap because they hate their body because they grew up being told that their body sucks. And they feel that way when they're small. They feel that way when they're big. They lose weight. It's never small enough. So I don't know. A lot of times they feel bad because of what's going on psychologically, because of their relationship with their body and their relationship with food. So they have such a fraught relationship with food that it makes it so that they can't tune into they can't tune into the cues that their body is giving them around food. So they override it. So perhaps that does make them not feel good. And they're disconnected from their interoceptive sensitivity. And so it's a lot of things. It's much broader than you're eating and you're eating wrong and you're not moving right. Mm-hmm. It's so much bigger than that. It's what society says about them. It's about how they feel with their body. It's about the environment that they grew up in, all of that stuff. And the body is kind of this like catch-all. So for people who have trauma or pain, a lot of times they will put that on the body because it's this thing that they think that they can control. So it ends up being this catch-all. And they think like, I feel like crap today, must be my body. And when I dig in with them, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, you're way overcommitting. Oh, I see. It's not your body. Oh, you're not sleeping enough. Oh, I see. And you hate your job.
Let's not talk about sleep, please.
How's your new sleep lifestyle?
Prefer not to talk about sleep.
So it's usually we dig in, and it's just that they're dysregulated, and so I can help them find a way to regulate, and yeah. So it's like, Alan, I don't know. I won't say is they're too big or too small, because it's none of my business. There are ways to feel better. And that is by tuning into the wisdom of your body.
And what I'm hearing, and we've talked about this a lot on the podcast, is it's like by needing to have this set point, right? And she's like, it doesn't matter, is like, we are so stuck in I'll be happy when. So regardless what their set point really is, it doesn't matter, because the whole point is not, okay, I'll be happy when I hit my set point. No, I'll be happy now. And like, that's like, I mean, in that it's all coming in. Just, I think about like with trauma and dissociation, like, okay, well then if people dissociate, I dissociate. Like, I know that's something I work on, and it's like, of course they wouldn't be like in tune with eating.
Exactly.
Like if your tendency is to dissociate, like you're not going to like recognize how your body is feeling with what you're eating, right? So like it all comes back to like the mental health piece of it.
Yeah, and to heal, you have to be present, and to be present, you have to feel safe. If you don't feel safe, you're going to escape in your brain or escape wherever. And so like to heal, you have to be present, like to, be mindful about food, to feel the cues of your body. You have to be present. But if it doesn't feel safe to be in your body for whatever reason, because of trauma or whatever, that's what needs to be repaired, beautifully said, Bree. I think you kind of wrapped it all up. We can no, I mean, you just you recap that really beautifully.
It was just like I had all these light bulbs going. I was like, oh, I see that. Okay, that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's what does it mean about me if my body is this certain way? And how can we disconnect from that? And like my clients, when we start their work, if they're in a bigger body, like I said, of course they want to lose weight, and so we have to work on finding a way. I'll say, like, I hear you loud and clear that you want to lose weight. I get that. But we have to find a way to respect your now body, because when we can genuinely respect the now body, then we're more inspired to nourish it and listen to it. So many people that are in larger bodies or in a body that they feel is too small, they hate it. And so they don't want to listen to it, and they want to sabotage it and punish it. And so, I just got, and sabotaging is things like, sometimes the, like binging, the what the hell binge, or like, sometimes laxative use, purging, whatever. Some people, it gets, more intense. So what would having a bigger body offer? What would having a smaller body offer? And guess what? That's available in the now body. It takes work here.
Yep.
And then the health piece is, yes, let's connect with our cues. Let's neutralize food, so it's not like good, bad food, but because like when you neutralize food, you really do start to crave what your body needs. You're not craving Oreos all the time. You're just not.
Right. Yeah.
And you're getting there. It sounds like you've already like started to move through that.
For sure. Yeah. So one of the things that got us on this and why you're here is I was actually at my friend's house with their kids, and I talked about, right, and you've already alluded to this, but I want to hear you talk a little bit more about it, is like kids and like I think back to my childhood trauma of like not wanting to eat, but then like here I am. So it was a very specific example. I'm here. I have Lily in my arms, and literally I have her plate, and we're walking down like the food line, right? This was a few weeks ago, and we're walking down the food line, and I'm like, you want deer? And she's like, yeah. And so I put some deer on her plate, and we get to like the potatoes, and I'm like, you want potatoes? She's like, no. And I'm like, no, I'm gonna put potatoes on your plate anyway, right? And like here I am probably causing her trauma, right, without even knowing, because she needs potatoes, right? Like, no, she has to, right? Like, she has to have a balanced meal, right? She's a kid, she doesn't know what she wants, right? Like, and she's like, no. And like, she's very vocal. She's like, no, I don't want potatoes. I'm like, Lily, like, I'm just gonna put potatoes on your plate. If you don't want to eat them, don't eat them. But they're there, and I want you to eat some. And then like, we sit down, and it's like, all right, I want you to take a bite of your potatoes, and right, like. And it's even the simple things like you sit down and they take 3 bites of food and they're like, I'm done. And you're like, no, I need you to take 5 more bites of food before you're done. Right? And like, I forget exactly what we were talking about on the last episode, but I'm like, maybe they already know. Right? And we're cutting that hardwire, right? They're already hardwired to know. Right, what they're supposed to be eating and when they're supposed to be eating and how much they're supposed to be eating. And here we are, the dumb adults that are like, no, you don't know your body.
Pushing our agenda.
I need you to eat more. Right. I need you to eat more food because whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, you need energy, you need weight, you're growing, you're right, all the things.
Yeah. Yeah. What's so interesting is like what the research shows is, like if you watch a kid, one day they'll eat like a whole block of cheese and a parent is horrified because they're like, you need vegetables though. You're going to get constipated. And then the next day, all they'll eat is raspberries and or whatever, And so what the research shows is that over about a week span, they get all of the food and nutrients that they need if we just let them explain. Now, that's not to say you let the kids run the show and you make whatever so there's intuitive eating for kids too, and they're born, knowing that how to eat intuitively, but a lot of times you run into food situations with kids and they're like super picky or, whatever. And a lot of that can be modeled or, a lot of that is, it's people pushing it too much. And so that little rebel inside of you is like, no, now I'm never going to eat lasagna because that was pushed on me. There's this trauma around it. It was like, eat the lasagna or whatever it is,
Right.
And so, but in general, so like if you have a healthy kid who, the parents haven't, interjected their agenda, and I say that lovingly because I was very much that person too. I had to learn.
Hey Jenny.
Yeah.
Hey Jenny. Sorry, real quick.
Yeah.
Do me a favor. Just make sure your microphone jack is in all the way.
I think it sounds fine.
Okay. I keep getting a little bit of a feedback. So sorry to interrupt.
Oh,
but
okay.
I keep getting a little like knocking, and you're not hitting your mic or anything. So I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't anything specific. Sorry.
Okay. No, I just get real excited when I talk about this stuff.
Yeah, please
all
go
over
ahead.
the place.
Yeah, please go.
But in a reasonably healthy situation, there's this thing called division of labor. And so there's, like the parents have responsibilities and the kids have responsibilities. And so the parents decide when, what, and where. So like the parents, they kind of provide the food. They don't make a big deal of it. And the kid decides how much and whether. So in your beautiful situation, the parents decided we are going to provide elk and potatoes, and this is what we're having today. And the kid decides how much of each of those things they want and whether they want either of those things. And over time, they get their nutrients met. But so it's not like, just let the kids eat candy and then they'll find their intuition, and that's the thing too, like with dessert, it's like, don't make it weird. Don't make it, like my mom, she was asking me, she loves this stuff now. And she's always asking me, like, 'cause she babysits my niece and nephews regularly. And so she was, I have one nephew who is so picky. I mean, he really will hardly eat anything. And everybody is always freaking out around it. And he gets so much attention for it. And he's the youngest. And it's not to say that it's not genuine. I think he really doesn't like certain things, but he gets so much attention for it. And so my mom, so you do these negotiations. And so my mom would say, if you eat the carrots, then you can have ice cream. And what happens is now carrots are the bad guy and ice cream is the good guy, and ice cream stays urgent. And also, what if I'm not hungry for carrots right now? It teaches me to override, that my intuitive wisdom. And so that's why it's so important to, where it's age appropriate, allow the kids to find that autonomy around whether and how much, So again, we're not having ice cream tonight. This is what, what's for dinner tonight, but you get to decide whether you eat the potatoes or how much of the elk you eat, or whatever. And that's kind of how it looks in a perfect world. And then, there's ways to kind of work with that when you have kids with certain, maybe they're super picky, or the parents have gotten into the habit of making 3 different meals for all the different family members, or, all that stuff.
So let's just talk real quick about pickiness, right? So you're surrounded by it, right? Like, you have me as a friend, and then your husband
I know
is ridiculous, right? Like, I thought I was picky, right? Right. Randy never tried an apple until he was 40, 41, something crazy like that, which it was always bewildering to me.
3, he never tried a banana, or an orange until after I met him, which was in his 40s. Yeah, it's crazy.
Oh.
It's pretty funny.
So and
does
he and I eat very.
What's the follow-up?
He and I.
Does he like them now?
Yeah. Actually, yeah. So.
He and I eat very similarly, right? Like a salad with dressing, right? Or we used to, right? And like a burger with cheese, very simple. So what is that? Is that the because his in his case, his family owned a restaurant. It's not like he wasn't privy to this food, right? What cause, I guess, is there a cause to pickiness, and does it play in this intuitive eating, with your nephew, right? Your family's eating these other foods. What's going on there?
Well, so with Randy, he grew up in a restaurant, and he really wasn't exposed to a lot of foods because his parents were pretty busy. I mean, they would go other places, but on the day-to-day, he'd show up at the restaurant, for dinner, and he knew he wanted steak and French fries. And so he'd just tell the cook to make him steak and French fries every single day. And so and there was nobody really overseeing that on a day-to-day basis. You see, right. He just decided, and so it's kind of like, it's possible that a kid might say, I want ice cream, every day. That's why you need that division of responsibility when they're younger. So with Randy, he didn't have anybody saying what, where, or whatever the other one is. He called the show. So wasn't really exposed to lots of things. And with my nephew, it's been modeled for him. So my sister eats all kinds of foods, but my brother-in-law, he also he is a picky eater, and I'm just saying picky because I don't want to stigmatize that. When there's somebody who's a picky eater, there's genuinely some fear around new foods. It really creates a lot of anxiety. And I noticed with Randy, he's this adventurer and he wants to try all these new things, and usually he's way more adventurous than me. And I'll try it, and I like to say I did it, but with food, I'm like, yes, bring it on. I'll try anything. Show me the world. I just get so excited, and he gets so nervous, and he'll do it, but he gets really anxious around it. And so there's some fear around it. It is a little bit of an anxiety. The relationship with food has been kind of impaired to some extent. And And also, then you have people like me when I met Randy. I'm sitting here smugly drinking my green drink and like looking at his steak. And I'm not that way anymore, I'm happy to report. But I mean, I didn't know, but I thought that I was helping him. Like, I just thought I was helping him be healthy. But then you have like people constantly commenting on it. And it makes it hard to own the space to feel safe to explore. And that's the thing with being a picky eater, is that your taste buds can change. You can, broaden. So now, Bree, follow up. He likes bananas. He likes apples. He likes salad. And he used to just eat iceberg lettuce, but now he eats spinach. And, so, I mean, it's expanded. So it can expand, but it's the same thing with a person who isn't in tune because they eat too much. It needs to be safe to build that food repertoire. And if it's not safe, and if you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. And you need the autonomy to kind of call that and be like, this is my body and I'm going to eat what I want to eat. And it's really nobody's business.
The anxiety around being a picky eater, the anxiety around it is less than low, right? Or much more than low. Like, it is high.
I know.
Right? Like, especially if like going out like to eat with friends. Like, I have a comfort with you and Randy at this point, right? Like, we know, like, we always joke, like, oh, what's going to be fucked up with my food this time, right? Like, it's like the running joke. But when you're at like a business meeting or right, like, and or whatever, right, you're just out with a group of people, and like the anxiety is, are they gonna fucking put cilantro on this? Because I will literally throw up, right? Like, because right, like so the anxiety around being a picky eater, like, I wish I could just order a damn salad with avocado and eat it, right? And like, that's the thing is, oh, just eat it, you can't taste it. Like, that's the thing I heard all my life. And like, I fucking hate that, right? Like, and like, that's the one thing, like, I swear I'll never do to my kids is, right, like, oh, just eat that, you can't taste it. And my response was always, if you can't fucking taste it, why is it in my food? Right? And yes, I can fucking taste it. That's why I don't like it, right? Like, I'm telling you specifically that I don't like it, right? And like, and then it's always been this, like, even my wife's done this to me, like people secretly try to put shit in my food and like not tell me about it, and like, and then they'll act like I don't notice, right? Like, or like, I'll be like, oh yeah, there's onions in this, because I hate onions, and so like, you can't sneak an onion past me, I promise you. Like, people have tried.
That would be a hard one to sneak past.
You would think.
That would be
really
really
strong
hard to
flavor,
sneak.
Dude.
And like, the texture is like very distinct.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I don't know how you would try to sneak. That's like, that's a rookie move.
Because it really is, and like, but it's like, it's one, it's frustrating, but two, the anxiety that comes with it. It's like, and like, even, and like, I've choked down some food, and like, even and even this is where, like, my wife's good, like, she's acknowledged, like, I remember one time we went and ate with her grandparents, and they served, it was like laden full of onions, and it was like the hardest meal of my life. And like, they're one of those people that, like, you have to clear the plate type of thing, right? Yeah, which is another thing, right? Like, tough. And like, I'm like, oh, it's great, right? And like, eating just this onion filled food, and so like, the anxiety for being a picky eater, it sucks, right? And like, so I get it. Like, I can't speak to Randy specifically, but like, even like, trying new foods, like, it's funny because like, there's times where I'll be like, oh, I do want to try something new today, but then there's times where it's like, nope, I just want a steak and a potato.
Right.
I am not in an adventurous mood. I don't want to try it. Yeah. Like, right, like, no, just give me the thing that I know that I like and I want.
Well, it's interesting. Like, my dad eats the same thing for every meal, but it's not like, I don't think there's an anxious, like, a fear of new foods. His relationship to food is pure fuel. So it's like, this is what I eat for breakfast. My mom will make, chicken, whatever seasoning or variation of that chicken. He'll have that. He'll have the same amount of broccoli, the same number of nuts. Like, he looks at it And like actually as he's gotten older, like he'll be like, oh sure, I'll have one like piece of this pie that we ordered after a dinner or something, you know. But it's just, he's like, you, if you didn't know him, you'd be like, he's a picky eater because he eats, you'd see him as like, he just eats the same thing. But it's really just his relationship to food is not one of, he's not seeking pleasure or this like, oh, I really want this taste or flavor, or I want to try something new. And like, it's really just, it's interesting.
It works for him.
It's fully functional.
Yeah.
And
that's interesting.
It's interesting too, because like we are primed as humans to enjoy eating. I mean, it is supposed to be pleasant because it is so integral to our survival. You know, it's kind of like, you know, nurturing is supposed to be pleasant. There's things that can interfere with that, but for the most part, nurturing is, you know, and bonding is supposed to feel pleasant. Sex is supposed to feel pleasant. Again, there's things that can interfere with that, but these things that are really integral to our survival, they are pleasant for a reason. And so I'm always just, you know, and I mean, Bree, I don't know what's, it doesn't matter what's going on with, you know, it sounds like that works for him and that's fine. No big deal, you know. But it did make me think about this idea of like, we can enjoy our food and, you know, eat in a way that's enjoyable and feels good to our body. And there's some good research that shows that people that eat for pleasure actually eat a wider variety of food. And so, and also people who eat for pleasure don't necessarily eat more of the like, you know, forbidden foods than people who are more like controlled eaters or rigid eaters. And so it's kind of like, I just did this post on Instagram, and it's like, so in France, you know, people, they spend so much less time thinking about what to eat, but they spend a lot of time sitting there at the table eating it. Or just kind of Europe in general, you know, they just spend a lot more time sitting there eating the food and kind of enjoying the food. And it's not even just the food, it's the experience that comes along with the food. And there's this idea that food is comforting, and it is supposed to be. And we sort of pathologize that, like eating for comfort is this bad thing, but food is so grounding and it's so comforting, and that's okay, you know. And eating for comfort is not the same as, you know, like if you're cued into your body, you know, you can eat for comfort and it does soothe, you know, like it's like soup in the winter and, you know, I don't know, you know, fruit in the summer and, you know, just that kind of natural desire for that soothing, you know, experience.
I wonder if that's been researched with the length of time. 'Cause that was actually one of the feedback I gave you and Randy when you went to Italy. It was like, be prepared for a long dinner, right? Like,
oh yeah, I know.
Right. But like, I wonder if there's, and maybe you know the answer to this or maybe you don't, but like when you go to Italy and you sit down for dinner, it's a 2.5 hour process. But you go through salad, you go through pasta, you go through a meat dish, right? Like you go through all of this. And then maybe like, is it that we've westernized, Americanized these meals so much that like, right? Because that's done over this 2.5 hour period, right? Is it now, right? When you get to America, you're still eating all those things, but in 45 minutes. Oh. And is that a problem? Is that a problem, right?
Wonder.
Like the hunger trigger, like I wonder if the slower you eat less because you get the full cues versus like a 5-minute lunch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that mindfulness piece is definitely a part of intuitive eating. You know, like where does your mind go when you're eating? And that's, you know, what a lot of times what I'll do with my clients is I'll ask them if they can be present for, you know, one whole meal. And for a lot of people, that's like, you know, like put away the phone for a whole meal. That's like asking for their firstborn. And so I'll say, okay, you know, and I'm not going to make them do what they don't want to do. You know, but I say, can you be present for like a couple bites in the beginning or a couple bites in the end? Or can you, before you eat, pause and just like take a breath and like look at the food and just kind of marvel at, like, this is going to go in my body and it's going to do some pretty cool stuff, and just take a moment to just consider that, I mean, it sounds like, Bree, you do a little bit of like conscious eating, or you said that you have a conscious relationship with your food, and I wonder if it's along those lines. But anyway, yeah, just kind of being with your food. And
she tried making me chew my food for 30 bites this last episode.
Oh yeah, and what are the sensory cues? Yes.
What's funny is I haven't changed to the 30 bites, Brie, but like I noticed that like I'll chew it like twice and swallow. I'll be like, yeah, I'll be like chomp chomp gulp. It's like the owl with the Tootsie Pop. Like how many legs? Like 1, 2, 3, crunch.
Yeah.
It's funny when you become aware of that, like, because I even noticed, like, I can't chew, like, not everything I chew for 30, but I've, like, just been more, like, connected to, like, how much and I see when I'm, like, in one of those days where I'm, like, wow, I literally inhaled that. Like, you're inhaling it. Mm-hmm. Like, that came from somewhere because, like, you're not chewing it. You're, like, breathing it down. Mm-hmm. Just swallowing it whole.
It's so funny because I've been so much more conscious of it since we talked, and you said it. Like, again, I haven't changed it. It's just now I'm like, fuck. Like, I think I chewed that bite like 3 times and swallowed it. Like, that was awful. So,
well, there's so much that happens that, like, in the mouth, like, our digestion starts in the mouth. And so that's really, like, what, like, we've evolved so far from, like, that part of the process. I've just listened to a lot of and read a lot on, like, even just coming down to, like, oral hygiene and things like that, but just the simple, and I think we talked on our episode about, like, the structure of the face has evolved because we're not chewing as much.
Yep. Jaws have sunken in. We were higher rates of sleep apnea. It's in the book Breathe by James Nestor, right, which we've talked about before, right? A lot has changed because of the fact that we don't chew our food, and we don't have foods that we chew, right? So it's not even that we don't chew the food, it's a lot of our foods have gone soft, right? So our diets have become so much softer, and it's changing the structure of our face, our jaws, our airways, and everything, and it's affecting people.
Interesting. Yeah.
But it's like we chew because it's part of the breakdown process, right? And so there's a lot that can, like, when you're taking in, like, big chunks, right? And I'm far from, like, I just know the very small amount of that piece of, but it also, I think, it seems like it probably connects back to, like, time too. So we start to get the signals, we're more in tuned with the signals of, like, being full versus you finish something in 5 minutes and you set your plate, right? Like, you've finished it in 5 minutes. And I bet even to the point where, you have more time, maybe I should eat more, versus, like, taking that same amount, eating it over 20 minutes. I don't know, just throwing out numbers and seeing what you're feeling as you're eating it. And then also, like, am I full now? I don't know.
Yeah.
One thing we talked about, Bree, in a prior episode, and you brought it up, Jenny, but we haven't talked about it here yet, is the socioeconomic, and I think that plays a big portion into time, and then food availability, right? Like what are you eating, right? Because we talked about your friend from India, right? That was like one of our first episodes, and I forget exactly what was available or wasn't available. But
it was the vegetarian conversation was like, yeah.
So socioeconomic, I like when you said that, I was like, oh yeah, that has to be a huge part of it, because also when you look at the rates of like diabetes in countries, in like third world countries, and even obesity rates, right? Like, you think that obesity comes with intake of higher calories, and in these third world countries where they're poor, it's not necessarily the case that they're over consuming calories. It's
like the stress too.
Yeah.
And the quality of food. Yeah.
Right, the quality of food, but then, like, if you are, right, like, let's just say blue collar worker, right? Running machines, right? Like you're given this 30-minute window to eat, but it's a 30-minute window to get off of your job, go get your lunch, go make your lunch, prepare your lunch, right? Whatever it is, right? Eat your lunch, consume your lunch, and then get back to your job.
Yeah.
Right? Versus like, I'll just use me as an example because I can speak to that, right? Like I'm in a very, fortunate job where if I want to take an hour and a half lunch, I'm going to take an hour and a half lunch. And, I'm not constrained, and I'm not, looking at my plate of food and like that example you were saying, Brie, and be like, shit, I have 10 minutes to eat this. I need to get this all down so then I can get back to work. So I think the socioeconomic status absolutely plays a huge role.
And there's lots of research on the experience of having agency over your life. And so that also speaks to, being in a job where you kind of show up and you're kind of told what to do, and you don't get a lot of say so, and you have to do it. And there's this, and you're not always treated great. And it's the same situation with, the example from the third world country, I think is what you're saying, but this feeling of not having agency over your life. And so independent of the food that yes, broccoli has more nutritional value than ramen noodles. Like that's not, I'm not debating that. But independent of that, there's this other factor, when you feel like you have agency over your life, that contributes to overall health, physical and mental health. And it speaks to our privilege. I wanted to hit on one more thing before we go off too far, just with the, mindful eating. Sometimes we eat real quickly and sort of ravenously, and sometimes that's more of a product of not eating regularly enough. So we have gone beyond pleasant hunger and into sort of ravenous hunger, and our body's like, okay, you're not listening to me, get out of the way, I'm taking over here. And we think that it's like us making this conscious choice to like, but really it's like our body is like, okay, you haven't nourished me all day adequately, and now, and sometimes that happens, if you're doing like an endurance event or something like that, you're like ravenously hungry, and sometimes that's kind of the way it happens, the eating, So a lot of my clients, they like don't eat breakfast and kind of eat lunch, and then at dinner they're like, why am I eating so terribly? And we have to like break it down, like you have to eat throughout the course of the day, because by then it's ravenous hunger.
And that's where also that comes into play of having the chips in the cupboard, right? Because if the chips are in the cupboard, by the time you get to that, what are you going to do? Are you going to pull out the chicken and cut it up and marinate it and cut up the vegetables? Or are you going to open the cupboard door, grab the pre-made chips that are ready to go, crack open the bag, and finish the bag of chips?
Yeah, your body's like, I need carbs. Like, get out of my way. I need carbs. Fast, easy carbs. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So, you talked for a long time.
I know, it's funny. I have like a question, but I'm like, gosh, it's 2 hours. And speaking of food, we're getting past my dinner time.
Yeah, you gotta eat your pleasant hunger.
Brie, I have like 3 hours until my dinner time.
I know. I have like, this is very intuitive eating question though.
Go for it. We'll wrap up after.
Yeah, try to make
and
it
I
quick.
have asked. I've talked about it on like one of our first few episodes. Was it was like right at the start of the pandemic, and I was like got back from Argentina, and I was by myself all the time. But I was eating like, I had from like Trader Joe's those dark chocolate peanut butter cups, and I would have like one or two. Like after dinner, I was like eating a lot of like dried fruit, and just overall I was eating like a lot more sugar, and I was craving it. Like I just felt I was like, that was like satiating whatever was like driving my hunger. And I was eating because in Argentina, the place I stayed was vegan, And then when we locked down, I was like locked down there. So we were eating predominantly vegan. We would go get, and I typically eat, I'm a meat eater. I eat like all meats. And we would get some like cheese for like, and like, I just felt like I need more fats, like whatever. So when I got back, I didn't know when I was going to leave for Wyoming where I was staying. So I didn't want to like stock up on a lot of food and things like that. So I was like still kind of eating like a little vegetarian, whatever. But I was like, had all of these like, it was like sugar, like dried fruit, again, chocolate. I go to my friends when on my way to moving to Cody, and he was like, has a bunch of wild game. We were eating meat for like, just lots of meat. And I went to go take a bite of that chocolate, and it didn't satisfy, like it didn't give me what it gave me like for the few weeks leading up to it. And so that's what I'm like very curious about, is like, I needed, like, chocolate wasn't the answer. There was something else that I was like, or sugar wasn't the answer, but there was something else my body was missing that then got it from the wild game, I'm guessing, which then made me be like, I don't even want this box of chocolates anymore. And so that's like what I think can be confusing, as to like what, like with, and obviously like you don't have to go into, like if you have like a snippet of that can explain like how do we decipher between what like our body's calling for and like the chocolate versus the wild game. I had no idea, right, until I experienced that contrast so close together. And that probably happens to people who are like, oh, I'm craving this sweets, like that's an easy
I'm craving
thing.
Chocolate.
I'm craving Oreos, but like is your body craving Oreos, or is it really like that's what your mind goes to, and it's really needing something else, and that will, I don't know, satiate that.
I've heard like when you hear like you're craving chocolate, you're craving magnesium, and you get a ton of magnesium in wild game, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that, Jenny.
Yeah, so there is a principle of intuitive eating that's called gentle nutrition, and it's like, after you go through, neutralizing and normalizing food and repairing your relationship with food, it is like, okay, can we add a little bit of protein to this? And, if you're vegetarian, obviously there's ways to do that. And I know that neither of you are, but, for the people that are, there's ways to do that. Can we, and, it's kind of like cueing in, like, I'm feeling a little lethargic, or I'm feeling like I haven't had much fiber today. Can I add this to my dinner? So it's not always, like, intuitive eating is a dynamic interplay between instinct, emotion, and thought. And so the thought piece is the part that there is nutritional information out there that is valid, and it's worth bringing into our repertoire. And so for you, it's all about kind of being curious and non-judgmental. So you learned something in that situation, and you learned like, I do a little better when I have plenty of complete protein, like I have plenty of this. And the whole, just really craving like dried fruit and carbs. And, if we were working together, which I know you have a reasonably healthy relationship with food, but, I would always go through, what are people eating throughout the course of the day? Like, what does their eating look like? How regular is it? Because sometimes that craving for carbs is simply because they're not having enough carbs. And I know you said you're having plenty, but I don't know how regularly. And so it's somewhere in between there. And sometimes when you're stressed, it is comforting to eat simple carbohydrates. And again, that's not the same as gluttony, but it is okay to be comforted by that. And that was like the whole pandemic time. It was like a really stressful time. And carbohydrates do create a bit of a calming effect. And that might have been psychologically what you were yearning for. I don't know. So does that kind of answer your question? Of course, it's complex, and I would need to dig in specifically, but it's like,
well, I think
it's learning.
Yeah, what you said is like you introduce things. How does that, interact? And And
it's like, you notice, I'm feeling a little lethargic, or I'm pretty like fight or flight lately? How can I regulate what's going on here? You kind of cue in, and you learn to ask yourself questions to, determine, like, do I need to move more? Do I need to eat different? Do I need to add a little bit more of this now? And, and a lot of times, like, I'll get a really, really clear craving for protein, or a really clear craving for, a carbohydrate, but it isn't always like that. Sometimes it's like nothing sounds good at all, and I just need to make some good food choices, like things that I know generally make my body perform reasonably well. So I guess, have I at least debunked for you that intuitive eating is about just letting go and eating cupcakes and Oreos all day?
For sure.
Okay, good.
For sure. Before we wrap up a little bit, I do want to cover just one more key thing I think is critical, because, right, it's what you do, and, right, if people are listening and maybe they're intrigued, but, like, what does this process look like? Because you've mentioned a few things. You've mentioned, like, habituating and, right, like, all these, like I'm hearing multiple steps. And again, right, we're in this world where we want instant gratification, and I don't feel like we're going to get instant gratification in this process, right? So what does this process look like? What's the time period? How long do your clients typically work with you? And, like, how long does it take to habituate food? Like, how long does it take to realize, oh yeah, no, I have a little guy in there telling me that Oreos are bad, right? Like, what does that look like? If you could talk to that a little bit.
Yeah. So I always do an assessment at the beginning, and that helps me understand where to start with people, because everybody is different. Their relationship with food is different, and so I always, so sometimes I'll start with, the making peace with food. Sometimes I'll start with, teaching them to hear their hunger cues. Sometimes I have to start with finding some space to respect the now body, so we feel motivated to nourish it. But what it looks like is that the goal is that I guide people back to the wisdom of their body. And so if they feel like they're always obsessing about food, or they're in a lot of pain about their body, or maybe they are really healthy, but they're spending so much energy being healthy, where maybe they could reallocate some of that energy to some of the things that really bring their life joy. I can help them find that peaceful relationship with food and their body. And so if people work with me, I have a 12 session package and a 24 session package. And so depending on, how a person is and their, a lot of people already have some intuition and they already have some insight. And so a lot of times we can get through it in 12 weeks, and they have the tools really built in. And the process is a lifelong process. Like, you just get more and more free to be in your body. You get more and more of that, and it gets more and more joyful, and that happens for the rest of your life. But when you're done with me, you have the tools to keep making that happen. Now, some people, it's more complicated, and we work together longer. Sometimes it is uncovering some, like, working with some of the trauma and regulating the nervous system first, and so we have to do lots of first, regulating, and then teaching them to sort of be present. And then we can say, now let's learn about the cues. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
So
cool.
Yeah. And if you want to learn more about the service, then you can just go to www.jennybilskie-smith.org, and I'll spell that. So www.jenny, Jenny, Bilsky, Bilskie, Smith, Smith.org. And I have all kinds of blogs. I have lots of stories from other clients, and information about a little bit more about the process.
Awesome. And where can they find you on social media? Instagram, Facebook?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on Instagram. So it's at Jenny_Bilskie_Smith. So that's my Instagram. And then I have a private and free Facebook group where the idea is that it's a little bit more of a vulnerable space and more of a supportive space where people can kind of share, so, hey, I ran into this, and sometimes people get sick of hearing from me, and so like they can ask each other and kind of play off of each other. That's the idea, and that's intuitive eating, food freedom, and body peace on Facebook. That group.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Jenny, it's been awesome having you on. I feel like it's been forever since we've seen each other too. So
I know,
it's great seeing you.
I agree.
Bree, you have anything else? You want to wrap us up with breath and journal prompt, then
and
breath?
One thing I want to say, just because I feel like I was like, I don't have food stuff. I feel like this can benefit anyone, right? Like it's not just.
You're right.
Right? Like I think that's an important thing to drive home is like, I'm very curious about it and connected, but like what is perfection with your relationship to food, and so I think there's so much insight that it sounds like you can get because you might not even realize where you're have weird nuances or what with your own relationship to food. So
like intimacy improves, your ability to just get like sensory pleasure improves, just like enjoying what you're hearing. Exactly. Yeah, it's great. Thank you for pointing that out, Bree, because you're right. It is for everyone, and all of us get a little disconnected at some point, no matter how good we are at tuning into our body.
Yeah.
Do
you have a like I usually do a breath, but I was gonna say if you have do you have like a short some type, I don't know, it could be like a short meditation or breath or like intuitive eating thing that you'd want to guide our listeners through?
Yeah.
As well, because I know you journal too, you're a big journaler. Like if you have like a journal prompt to share with them as well, like maybe something you share with clients, that would be great.
And it could be a combo, like maybe it's a 2-for-1.
Yep.
Okay, yes, I have both of those. And thank you, Bree, for allowing me to lead it. It is an honor, and I love it. I do this. So I'm going to do my favorite breathing exercise, and this is an exercise that is designed to create joy. So if you're feeling kind of bummed, it can kind of elevate your mind state to a place of joy. And I'm going to have you do some things with your face, and I'm going to close my eyes. I'm not watching you. I know we're on camera. It's basically just have you smile, but there's, these messages between the musculature in our face and our body. So it's all going to kind of work together. So, all right. So if you're comfortable, go ahead and close your eyes. And if you don't like to close your eyes, no worries. You can just gaze downward and know that my eyes are closed, so I'm not staring at you. Let's just start by bringing our attention to our breath. Just notice the breath as it comes in, and you can say silently to yourself in, and you can say silently to yourself out, noting the breath. On your next exhale, just allow the muscles in your forehead to release. And then the next exhale, the muscles in your jaw to release. Then your neck and your shoulders. Now feel your body in the chair. Feel where your body connects with the chair. You can open your eyes and peek at me. I'm going to have you do something with your hands. So you're going to take your right pointer finger and put it underneath your left collarbone. And then your left pointer finger, put it underneath your right collarbone. So you're doing kind of like a butterfly over your heart. And just notice how the space underneath your hands expands kind of subtly. and then it shrinks. And now I want you to imagine that there is a ball in the center of your chest, right around where your heart is. And this ball it can be your favorite color, or it can be like the sun. I like to picture the sun, but you pick which one works for you. And as you inhale, imagine that ball getting bigger right around your heart. And as you exhale, imagine it deflating. Over and over. And then just bring a gentle smile to your lips. And I'm going to be quiet for a moment and allow you to experience the sensation of that beautiful ball getting bigger in your chest and then smaller, right along with the breath. And then you can drop your hands to your lap. Wiggle your fingers and toes just a little bit, and whenever you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes. All right, a little joy neurobiology there.
That was awesome.
Yeah,
thank you, Jenny.
Yeah, thank you. That's one of my favorites. And for a journal prompt, I would say write about what you appreciate that your body does for you. Nothing about the way that it looks. What do you appreciate that it does for you?
I love that.
That's beautiful. Well, it's been real.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you
so much for having me.
Jenny. Yeah, it's been great having you on. Bree, it's a pleasure as always.
Yeah, it's good to meet you, Bree.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Thanks for taking time
All
out
right.
of your day.
Of course. All right, you guys
All
have
right.
a great evening.
Yep.
Happy Mother's Day
See-
if that applies.
Yes. See ya.
All right, bye.